Good morning to all of you. We are Wednesday in April, the 8th of April specifically. We are done with the civil religion. You had your homework to do there to write your own civil religion suggestion. As I said, you've got some time till Friday if you like. And now we move to also a text by Rousseau, probably the longest text we read this semester. Afterwards we'll move to Diderot on the sufficiency of natural religion, which is not difficult at all, very short text. And then we finish our course with Kant, From Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone. That means we still have three texts on our syllabus. As I told you before, we are on time. We are moving along very well, and we are even more thorough than usual. So this is very good. We are going to deal today with the second text then of Rousseau. This text comes from Émile. Émile is the book that Rousseau wrote on education. A very, very big book. Wrote it for a young man for his education, called Émile. So here, as part of his education, he is asking the question of the religious. And so he is dealing with religion not from the point of view then merely of the state, as we did in the text from the social contract, from book 4, chapter 8, but from the point of view of the education of a young man, a child. Okay. So the text is very famous. It's considered Rousseau's most important text on religion and religious education. And so that's why we're doing it. You will notice once again, as I said, it's our longest text. So we will do a lot of it. Just follow along with me. It starts in your reader on page 93 and it ends on page, I think, 112 or 14. Yes, 115 actually. So we're not going to read every single thing, but we will read the important paragraphs, or as much as I can, I'll sift through everything and lead you to the gist of the arguments, the most important thing to know. So let us start these together. Then Rousseau from Émile, your reader on page 93, I believe. I trust we've got the same page numbers. The creed of a Savoyard priest, or the profession of faith of the Savoyard priest, to translate more literally. La profession de foi du vicaire savoyard. Okay, we start, of course, by reading everything at first, just to get the context. My child. So again, this is a child learning about how to think of the religious. This is a book educating him. Priest says, so this is not Rousseau, of course, but Rousseau is taking on the same ideas as the priest. We can identify then whatever Rousseau the priest is saying here with what Rousseau really believes. Okay? Just to be very simple with you, we can say these are Rousseau's views throughout the text. My child, he says, do not look to me for learned speeches or profound arguments. I am no great philosopher, nor do I desire to be one. I have, however, a certain amount, notice, of common sense and a constant devotion to truth. I have no wish to argue with you, nor even to convince you. It is enough for me to show you, in all simplicity of heart, what I really think. Consult your own heart while I speak. That is all I ask. If I am mistaken, I am honestly mistaken, and therefore my error will not be counted to me as a crime. If you too are honestly mistaken, there is no great harm done. if I am right, we are both endowed, we possess, we are both endowed with reason. We have both the same motive for listening to the voice of reason, and so common sense. Why should not you think as I do? Okay, so a very simple presentation. The priest is saying, of course, he's talking to a child. I'm not going to go through very high philosophical arguments with you. This is not why I am here. I will try to be as clear as possible, and I will follow what's common sense. It means common sense reminds us of le sens commun. It reminds us of what Descartes says, that everyone has common sense. It means that everyone has reason, to be simple. Before any kind of elaborate developments of arguments. We all still have common sense because we all have rationality, we all are reasonable. But we notice already in this very first paragraph a term that is at the core of Rousseau's thinking, and particularly then also here at the core of his thinking of religion. That is the word heart. So you must consult your own heart. When we are speaking of the heart, of course, we are speaking of something very personal. And we are reminded also of Pascal, whom we haven't read. Pascal says that the heart has its reasons which reason cannot know, right? So, of course, you can follow reason, but there are also truths that are not the truth of reason. They are the truth of your heart. Something to do with your inner self. And notice how important interiority here is. In your inner self you have some truth. Search not only the arguments of reason, but search also in your heart. Search how you feel in your heart. There are the truths of the hearts. So when Rousseau is speaking of this, we know that he's not going to speak like everyone else in the period. Rousseau, born in 1712, I believe, is at the very heart of the Enlightenment. And he writes the Émile in 1755. So this is, of course, the French Enlightenment. And the French Enlightenment especially followed reason and understanding. This was the way to the truth, including the religious truth. If you remember when we talked about natural religion, right? And we have the argument from design. A lot of the Enlightenment people, philosophers and thinkers, looked for the proof of God from the argument of design. So it's a very kind of rational argument. Here Rousseau is going against all this when he's calling, once again, like Pascal did, but we see a bit differently, for the heart. The truth is from the heart, not from the understanding. Okay? So this is why Rousseau is called also the enfant terrible of the Enlightenment. The man who is at the very heart of the Enlightenment and understands it, and yet goes against it, and he does it so well. He criticizes it so well. And this call for the heart, that is at the heart of Rousseau's thinking, and is actually a call, of course, for not understanding and reason, but for feelings. And we know when Rousseau is saying this, he's preparing something for something that will happen over about 50 years later. Those who say that we are done with the understanding, we cannot follow the understanding in everything. Truth should be more immediate, whereas the understanding and reason, especially, are not immediate. You have to think about things, you have to argument and so on. What is immediate is like what Rousseau says, is feelings. And this, of course, when we are in the beginning of the 19th century, this is what we call Romanticism. So Rousseau is a romantic before his time. Rousseau prepares for the Romantics' view of truth and the Romantics' view of God. The Romantics' view of God as not one that we get to from arguments of design, or however much reason can argue, and however reason sees God through its own deductions. No, it's something you feel, and we can say, we can see that in the Romantics when they go out in nature to find God, and something not organized, not in a human garden, but in a forest. Something where their feelings are stirred and they feel the presence of God within them. This is all prepared by Rousseau, and this is why this text is also important. So, to finish with this first paragraph, let us note then from the beginning that Rousseau is calling not for purely rational arguments, not for complicated arguments, maybe for common sense, yes, so we use reason, but also for heart, your heart, your inner self, if you like, how it feels. Stay with me. I am jumping one paragraph. So we go to paragraph 3 on page 93. Conscience, they tell us, Damir, is the creature of prejudice. But I know from experience that conscience persists in following the order of nature in spite of all the laws of man. In vain is this or that forbidden. Remorse makes her voice heard, but feebly, when what we do is permitted by well-ordered nature, and still more when we are doing her bidding. My good youth, nature has not yet appealed to your senses. May you long remain in this happy state when her voice is the voice of innocence. Remember that to anticipate her teaching is to offend more deeply against her than to resist her teaching. You must first learn to resist, that you may know when to yield without wrongdoing. From my youth up, I had reverenced the marriage state as the first and most sacred institution of nature. Having renounced the right to marry, I was resolved not to profane the sanctity of marriage. For in spite of my education and reading, I had always led a simple and regular life, and my mind has preserved the innocence of its natural instincts. These instincts had not yet been obscured by worldly wisdom, while my poverty kept me remote from the temptations dictated by the sophistry of vice. This very resolution proved my ruin. My respect for marriage led to the discovery of my misconduct. The scandal must be expiated. I was arrested, suspended, dismissed. Those are all, I stop here. I mean, these are all details from the priest's life and something of a parallel to Rousseau's. But what I want you to retain, this is why we're commenting, is the following. There is a voice of conscience. Okay? And notice where that conscience comes from. There is a voice of conscience that comes from our being in nature, our being part of the order of nature, is what the vicar and so Rousseau is saying here. So those who say against conscience that it is the creature of prejudice are somehow wrong. Why is the vicar saying this? Because in the Enlightenment we discover that religion has placed in us so many rules, so many things that are permitted, so many things that are forbidden, and these are very often seen as created by different religions to keep us in check and to cause us to feel, if you like, guilt for things that we shouldn't feel guilt about. So we have prejudice about prejudgments about different things, like if I kiss someone, oh, I should feel horrible about it. Or if I go out with someone who's not of my religion, let's suppose. This is also bad, and I have my conscience that tortures me. So the vicar says, yes, be careful. They say that conscience is the creature of prejudice, that it comes from different things that they instilled in us, that they educated us with. But even without these things, if we get rid of all that they place in us with their education, right? Even if we get rid of all this, we will continue to have conscience. Then we have a good form of conscience, if you like, because then we will be following nature. So there is something here in addition to the heart that we find in Rousseau. When we want the truth, we go to the heart. When we want the right feelings, we go to the heart. And when we want the truth, we go to our conscience. Our conscience as free from anything that polluted it through our education, through our lives, etc. Okay, so we have in us conscience, and a good form of it. Now, there is also, in addition to this notion of conscience here, the notion in the next paragraph I read of innocence. So this goes back to what Rousseau believes happens to us. I explain to you a little. Rousseau thinks, and you can read for that in particular his discourse on inequality. Rousseau thinks, and please, you can learn this by heart if you like. You find it also in the social contract. Man is good. Society corrupts him. Okay? Man is naturally then good. Man is good, naturally good. Society corrupts him. So Rousseau thinks that when we were in the state of nature, and he writes all his discourse on inequality to show that, to prove it, we were in a state of equality between us and a state of peace. When we entered the state of society, it was the birth of jealousy. We are jealous of each other then. And so the birth of evil things, the birth of bad things, the birth of war. This is what leads to war in society. Okay. So for example, when we are in the state of nature, he says we have two principles that are always there. The principle of preservation, so this is amour de soi, love of oneself. Of course, you have to preserve yourself, very much as Jesus, for example, says, you must love yourself because then you cannot love someone else. For how can anyone love someone else if they have not first loved themselves? So love of oneself, and the other principle is the principle of pity. So that this principle of preservation, of love of oneself, does not lead to different wars. I only think about myself, I protect myself, as happens in Hobbes' work. No, there is also for Rousseau a principle of pity. So when I see someone suffering, I sympathize with them, I suffer with them, I feel for them. This is the state of nature. People are equal, they are at peace, and when someone is suffering, the other helps that person. Okay? The problem starts with jealousies in the state of society. And so the voice of conscience which was very good and natural in the natural state, that always led me to pity others, that always led me to help others, becomes polluted by everything else added to it in society. Okay? So the innocence of nature then is lost. Of course, this is not simply a chronological thing that Rousseau is saying. We all have still these basic principles, natural principles. So the child that he's educating has already the two principles of preservation, so love of oneself, and pity. Now, once again, this love of oneself turns in society into something else called amour propre. Okay? Amour propre. So love of oneself becomes love of me through a different reflection. It's very hard to find very good translations for these words. Love of oneself, or actually, you can correct me here, I would translate amour de soi as self-love. This is probably better. And amour propre as love of oneself. Okay? it's not a very good way to do it. I think this is how it's usually translated. Love of oneself is amour propre, it's the bad love, and self-love is amour de soi. Okay. Amour de soi, you have it in a state of nature, it's very good, you preserve yourself and you have pity afterwards, second principle. Amour propre means it's the fruit of jealousy. I give you an example. I love myself in the state of nature, so I have self-love. Okay? I preserve myself. I survive. I eat, I drink, etc. In the state of society, if I see a woman, and another guy wants to also go out with this woman, then I start to see myself as this woman wants to see me. So I know this woman likes a tall man with green eyes, with dark hair, short hair, etc. And I start to try to fit into that image, right? I cut my hair if it's long. I shave my mustache if she doesn't like mustaches. So I no longer have amour de soi, amour de moi in this case. I no longer have self-love. I start to have the love that is the fruit of jealousy. I start to have the love of myself. So myself as seen, as projected in some way by another. So I am, of course, we can use the word here if we want, alienated from myself. This is the jealousy. And within this world, conscience, of course, is changed from a natural conscience that is good, because man is good in the state of nature, to a conscience polluted by so many things. Oh, I must feel bad because I didn't do what she wanted to do. She asked me to buy her something. I didn't buy it because, etc. I start to have this really bad conscience that is only present in society. So I lose my innocence. So in the education of a young man, Rousseau is here calling to go back to nature. We have to educate the young man while keeping his conscience natural, while keeping his instincts, natural instincts, present, not obscured, as he says here, by worldly wisdom. Okay. Good. Now, he's going to deal with the skepticism, like Hume, right? We have in Hume a lot of skepticism about the existence of God. Of course, we are going here into religion. So I'm going to jump with you to page 94. Paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, think of Philo here, to make connections. Think of Philo in Hume's text. I cannot understand, I read, how anyone can be a skeptic sincerely and on principle. Either such philosophers do not exist, or they are the most miserable of men. There's a mistake here. They are the most miserable of men. Doubt with regard to what we ought to know is a condition too violent for the human mind. It cannot long be endured. In spite of itself, the mind decides one way or another, and it prefers to be deceived rather than to believe nothing. My perplexity, he says, was increased, I continue to read, by the fact that I had been brought up in a church which decides everything and permits no doubts, so that having rejected one article of faith, I was forced to reject the rest. As I could not accept absurd decisions, I was deprived of those which were not absurd. When I was told to believe everything, I could believe nothing, and I knew not where to stop. I consulted the philosophers, I searched their books and examined their various theories. I found them all alike proud, assertive, dogmatic, professing even in their so-called skepticism to know everything, proving nothing, scoffing at each other. The last trait, which was common to all of them, struck me as the only point in which they were right. It means they are scoffing at each other, attacking each other. Braggarts in attack, they are weaklings in defense. Weigh their arguments, they are all destructive. Count their voices, everyone speaks for himself. They are only agreed in arguing with each other. I could find no way out of my uncertainty by listening to them. I read on. I suppose this prodigious diversity of opinion is caused in the first place by the weakness of the human intellect, and in the second, by pride. We have no means of measuring this vast machine. We are unable to calculate its workings. We know neither its guiding principles, nor its final purpose. We do not know ourselves. We know neither our nature, nor the spirit that moves us. We scarcely know whether man is one or many. We are surrounded by impenetrable mysteries. These mysteries are beyond the region of sense. We think we can penetrate them by the light of reason, but we fall back on our imagination. I stop this paragraph here. What is Rousseau saying? Through the voice of the Savoyard Priest, he's refuting and refusing two things. Okay. And I'm sure if you reread, you can see them. He's refusing dogmatic people. In other words, anyone that gives you articles of belief and refuses any argument about them. Articles of belief, not of a civil religion, as we saw in the social contract, but of a positive religion, a religion that imposes itself. So, he says, every time they told me you must believe this, and when I ask questions, they say, you just believe it. You have no way of understanding, so you believe it or you leave. In other words, no argument, just dogmatic things. So he's refusing organized religion. Let's be very specific. He's refusing the church here. So he says, when I want to know truly about God, I cannot go to the men of the church who are deciding dogmas for us and imposing them on us. So far, so good. The Enlightenment, people like Diderot, for example, Voltaire, right, the big figures of the Enlightenment in France, also refuse such positive doctrines. Please note, positive means it's put by men, not put by nature or by God immediately in our hearts. It's from the word ponere in Latin, the verb. Ponere means to put, so not positive, negative, okay? So these positive religions that have dogmas are refuted also by all the philosophers most of the philosophers of the Enlightenment, the big ones at least, the most important ones, as I said, like Diderot and Voltaire. Voltaire, who was a deist, and Diderot a skeptic, very much close to Hume's thinking. But Rousseau also disagrees with these guys, right? He's not going to be like Diderot and Voltaire and Hume. Hume, who I must say to you, is about the same age as Rousseau. I think Hume was born in 1711 or 10. I think there's 1 year difference between them. And they died in the 70s, both 76, 75, I think. So also he disagrees with Hume's skepticism. He disagrees then with the philosophers. He disagrees with those philosophers who believe in the argument from design. So everyone, if you like, if we look, every one of the philosophers, and if we look at Hume's, to make connection, Hume's dialogues on natural religion, he would disagree with everyone. Because in the end, the piety of Demia is a bit too dogmatic too. Secondly, it doesn't go to the feelings of the heart. And Philo is, of course, a skeptic philosopher, so he's also against him. And Cleanthes, who follows this rationality and the argument from design, is also refuted by and refused by Rousseau. So Rousseau is, again, like I told you, the enfant terrible, this expression used a lot in English from French. So the one who's at the heart of the Lumière, the enfant terrible of the Enlightenment. He's at the heart of it, but he refuses its most famous and prided accomplishments in rationality. So he refuses the philosophers. On the one hand, then, he refuses all religious dogma, and he refuses all philosophers. And then he says, as we said at the end here, there is a mystery, there are mysteries around us, of course, and these mysteries, we cannot penetrate them by the light of reason. This is a whole refutal of the Enlightenment, and of course, its beginnings with Descartes. Before the Enlightenment also, rationality. Okay. Whether we can again draw some parallels between him and Endymion, it's a good question. I think there is that idea of mystery in Endymion. I think they would agree on certain things and certain mysteries about approaching God, but they would deviate when it comes to really going to the heart, as Rousseau does and wishes to do. Okay, for this point. Page 95 then, please, we skip the first two paragraphs. Paragraph 3. I also realized, we continue within the same vein, I also realized that the philosophers, far from ridding me of my vain doubts, only multiplied the doubts that tormented me and failed to remove any one of them. So I chose, we're leaving the philosophers, we're leaving theologians, we are leaving the dogmatics. What did I seek then, he says? So I chose another guy and said, let me follow the inner light. Okay? So please underline, let me follow the inner light. It will not lead me so far astray as others have done, or if it does, it will be my own fault. And I shall not go so far wrong if I follow my own illusions, as if I trusted to their deceits. So, no guide from philosophers, no guide from priests, no guide from theologians, no guide from anyone dogmatic. Where is your guide? And notice how it's capitalized. There is something divine about it, there is something universal about it, and yet it's personal. My inner light, we will see the development of that. In other words, my heart. What I have, what I feel inside me, I have to follow that inner light inside. Connected, we will see, to conscience. Okay? And I jump with me one paragraph, and we go to the middle of the next one. So I chose another guide and said, let me follow my inner light. So jump, as I said, bearing thus within my heart the love of truth as my only philosophy, and as my only method a clear and simple rule which dispensed with the need for vain and subtle arguments. We already said this. I returned with the help of this rule to follow my inner light, to the examination of such knowledge as concerned myself. And notice here, underline, I was resolved to admit as self-evident all that I could not honestly refuse to believe, and to admit as true all that seemed to follow directly from this. All the rest I determined to leave undecided, neither accepting nor rejecting it, nor yet troubling myself to clear up difficulties which did not lead to any practical ends. It's an interesting thing. Again, I was resolved to admit as self-evident all that I could not honestly refuse to believe, and to admit as true all that seemed to follow directly from this. All the rest I determined to leave undecided. For those who read philosophy on a regular basis, they will see very clearly, like you should see, that there is a clear reference here and a challenge. Remember the beginning of our semester with me. As you reread again, I was resolved to admit as self-evident all that I could not honestly refuse to believe, and to admit as true all that seems to follow directly from this. All the rest I determined to leave undecided, neither accepting nor rejecting, etc. Somebody said something extremely similar, and yet in a totally opposing way. Make connections again for your exam. Well, it's Descartes. Descartes, particularly when we read Meditations 1 and 2, and particularly in Meditation 1, if you remember, Descartes says that I will accept only what is self-evident, what is true, self-evidently true, and anything else I put into doubt. And just as a reminder to you, go back to page 15, Meditation 1. Descartes says, it is now some years since I detected how many were the false beliefs that I had from my earliest youth admitted as true, and how doubtful was everything I had since constructed on this basis. And from that time I was convinced that I must once for all seriously undertake, to rid myself of all the opinions which I had formerly accepted, and commence to build anew from the foundation if I wanted to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences. And then the next paragraph, page 16, now for this object it is not necessary that I should show that all of these opinions are false. I shall perhaps never arrive at this end, but inasmuch as reason already persuades me that I ought no less carefully, again, withhold my assent, so not accept as true, very similar to Rousseau, from matters which are not entirely certain and indubitable. If it's not self-evident to me, again, I do not accept it. If it's not certain and indubitable, then from those which appear to me manifestly to be false. If I am able to find in each one some reason to doubt, this will suffice to justify my rejecting the whole. So Descartes is looking, let me reiterate, for what's clear and distinct. What is self-evidence? One of the things in Descartes, if you read on in the Meditations, there are things that are evident. It's the notion of evidence, not proof, the notion of something evident. So, notion of something evident, and anything else that is not, right, Descartes, I put in parentheses. I withhold my judgment about it, if you remember. Well, Rousseau seems to be speaking like Descartes, and he knows that. He's writing 100 years later, more than 100 years later, and he knows that. I was resolved, I reread, to admit a self-evident, something from Descartes, all that I could not honestly refuse to believe, again from Descartes, and to admit as true all that seemed to follow directly from this. Again Descartes, I start from what is evident, I build on it, and then what I have is true. This is in his method, Descartes' method. All the rest I determined to leave undecided. If I don't know, I put in brackets, Descartes, neither accepting nor rejecting it, nor yet troubling to myself. When we add to this also, with this parallel, that Descartes also said, I'm getting rid of tradition, right? I also don't follow what I learned. I follow myself, but where is the difference? Is Rousseau here being Descartes? Well, the difference is very simple, if you think about it. And we will end with this today. What is self-evident for Descartes, as you well know now, are the clear and distinct ideas of reason, such as the axioms of mathematics, right? Two parallel lines never meet, or meet at the infinite. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So Descartes, when he gets rid of tradition, when he gets rid of everything he learned, when he gets rid also of the witness of his senses, right, what comes from his senses, he ends up with reason, rationality. So Descartes' doubt puts him in rationality. This is not the case here. So what is self-evident in Descartes is reason, and we now know what's evident, self-evident there for Rousseau, is the heart, right? It's the heart. So I search for truth in the heart. Okay? The big opposition here between rationalism and its inheritance in the Enlightenment and Rousseau's return to the heart, to the truth of the heart. We stop here for today, and we will continue next time. On page 96. Now, I must inform you that according to the message I received from the president, from the university president, which you probably too have received, we are not really taking all the holiday. We're not going to have time off as was planned for all the period between the Eastern and Western Easter. We will only be getting our Fridays off and Mondays off twice. So in other words, this week we do not have class on Friday, so you are free. But I do expect you to send me your homework, right? Don't forget that you have to send your homework on the civil profession of faith. Make sure your homework is at least a little bit over a half page to a page. Don't just write 4 or 5 lines. It's not enough. And I will meet you then next Wednesday. So normally next Wednesday was off. So next Wednesday will be the 15th of April. The 15th of April, then we have class. Okay? So I will meet you, I will talk to you on the 15th of April. Till then, stay safe. Stay home as much as you can, like I do. You have, I hope, some books that will keep you company. Avoid excessive television. Television can kill the mind. And go to your books for entertainment and for a better kind of thinking and a better life. I wish you a good stay at home and see you next Wednesday.